50 Literature Ideas You Really Need to Know by John Sutherland. This is an independent educational overview, enriched with our own integrative analysis and actionable exercises. Think of it as a guided reflection to spark your own insights, not a replacement for reading the book itself.
Chapter 1. Mimesis. Mimesis, an ancient Greek term signifying holding a mirror up to nature, carries a weight beyond simple imitation or representation, standing as a fundamental yet elusive concept within the history of Western art and its values. This idea sparks a perennial philosophical debate. Is literature a true reflection of reality, or merely a clever fabrication? Plato famously banished poets from his ideal republic, perceiving their mimetic creations as intrinsically superficial shadows of truth. He argued that such art appealed dangerously to fleeting emotions rather than fostering rational thought, thereby propagating beautiful lies that obscured genuine understanding. Aristotle, however, offered a robust defense of mimesis in his Poetics. He countered Plato by asserting that literary art, precisely because it is unfettered by the accidental specifics of history, can articulate higher, essential truths. A fictional narrative, like Anna Karenina, might reveal universal insights more profoundly true than any mere historical account. Furthermore, Aristotle introduced the concept of catharsis to address the emotional impact of art. While art undoubtedly stirs powerful feelings, he argued this engagement paradoxically purges or tempers those emotions, leading to a profound calm of mind, all passion spent. This process, rather than diminishing reason, actually clarifies it, enabling better judgment. Yet Aristotle's catharsis theory faces ongoing criticism, particularly for the potential to overvalue literature based solely on its emotional resonance. This centuries-old debate concerning mimesis, from Plato's initial critique to Aristotle's elegant refutations, and continuing through modern thinkers like Orwell, Joyce, and Brecht, who grappled with the artist's role in society and their relationship to truth, underscores its enduring complexity in understanding literature's profound function.
02. Ambiguity. Literature thrives on the inherent slipperiness of language, deliberately embracing multiple meanings to capture life's profound complexity. Unlike everyday speech, where precision often reigns, literary ambiguity serves not to confuse, but to enrich, allowing words to resonate on numerous levels simultaneously. As Humpty Dumpty asserted, words can mean what one chooses, but Alice shrewdly questioned the capacity for such varied interpretations, a capacity literature masterfully exploits. This polyvalence, or multi-meaningfulness, permeates literary works. A text's significance can shift dramatically across historical eras, as exemplified by Uncle Tom's Cabin transforming from a Civil War-era narrative to a term of insult. Similarly, a book like Jack Kerouac's On the Road might resonate profoundly differently with an individual at various stages of their life. On a grander scale, entire works, such as Shakespeare's Hamlet, invite endlessly varied interpretations across centuries, each era and critic finding new facets, from noble philosopher to problematic figure. Even a single word can hold dual or contrary meanings, as seen in Hamlet's cutting sun-sun pun, or in Gerard Manley Hopkins' poem The Windhover, where buckle simultaneously suggests fortifying and collapsing. This fascination with layered meaning became a focal point for literary criticism in the 20th century. William Empson's influential 7 Types of Ambiguity explored how language, especially in poetry, allows for such rich, interwoven interpretations. Critics even ventured into psychoanalytic ambiguities, pondering whether texts could harbor unconscious Freudian slips from their authors, implying meanings perhaps unintended but deeply embedded. This emphasis on decoding complexity led to practical criticism and new criticism, movements that championed close reading of texts in isolation, seeking to uncover every possible meaning. While this approach helped establish a literary canon based on a text's pliability, its dominance has waned, though the irreducible ambiguity of great literature remains a compelling feature.
3. Hermeneutics. Hermeneutics explores how meaning is extracted from text and understood. Its very origin, linked to Hermes, messenger and mythic patron of liars, wittily questions if fiction reveals higher truths or artful deceptions. The field grapples with where meaning truly resides: in the reader's mind, the text's inherent structure, the medium, or through social consensus. Crucially, meaning is not fixed. Historical contexts dramatically reshape how works like Lady Chatterley's Lover are perceived. Understanding literature presents paradoxes, such as whether deeper insight into Hamlet comes from its original staging or future scholarly dissection. Most gravitate towards the former, valuing contextual immersion. The hermeneutic circle illustrates an interpretive dilemma. Grasping a text's whole relies on understanding its parts, yet the parts only cohere within the whole. Roland Barthes offers a nuanced solution, differentiating between a first reading focused on narrative progression, the hermeneutic code, and subsequent readings that unveil richer symbolic layers, transforming understanding even when plot is known, as seen in Balzac's Sarrasine or canonical works like Pride and Prejudice. Yet, not all champion such interpretive depth. Susan Sontag, in her radical Against Interpretation, famously advocated an erotics of art, urging passionate, unmediated engagement over academic dissection. 4. The classic. The chapter delves into the elusive and frequently misused concept of a classic. T.S. Eliot, speaking in 1944 amidst the turmoil of World War, noted the term's abuse, defining a classic as emerging from a mature civilization, language, literature, and a mature mind. Yet he acknowledged the difficulty in truly pinpointing this something centrally important. Frank Kermode re-examined this question in the 1970s, suggesting classics are cultural touchstones society deems vital for preservation, particularly during societal threats. He refined Eliot's perspective, highlighting three key elements: imperialism, civilization, and antiquity. Classics, Kermode argued, transcend time and borders, embodying peak human intellect and morality. He emphasized that an empire's cultural power often underwrites a classic's stature. The true test of a classic, beyond mere lastingness, lies in its inherent pliability. Kermode posited that a classic's essence is its capacity to accommodate new interpretations across generations, subsisting in change while remaining eternally relevant and tolerant of diverse understandings.
5. Intentionalism. The concept of authorial intent often sparks lively debate. Do creators truly know what their work is about? Consider Jane Austen's declared aim to write about ordination, John Milton's ambition to justify the ways of God to man, or Charles Dickens's desire to highlight sanitary improvements. Yet, readers frequently unearth deeper, alternative meanings, interpreting Mansfield Park through the lens of slavery or Paradise Lost for its profound poetry rather than its Christian doctrine. Such divergences immediately raise a fundamental question: who truly owns the meaning within a literary work? Authors, it seems, may create things they themselves are not entirely aware of. Daniel Defoe, for instance, seeking merely to earn a living, inadvertently pioneered the novel genre with Robinson Crusoe, a form he didn't even conceptualize. This inherent disconnect between creation and conscious intent fuels the idea that literature transcends explicit authorial claims, leading critics, satirized as Professor Morris Zapp, to assert that works are rarely about their obvious subjects, and that astute interpretation wisely sidesteps authorial statements. This perpetual tension between authorial authority and readerly ownership intensified dramatically with the emergence of new criticism and practical criticism in the 1930s. Viewing intentionalism as a fallacy, these movements, possibly influenced by an era of global totalitarianism, championed the text as an orphaned entity. They argued that hunting for the author's intent was a fatal distraction from the words on the page, pulling focus away from the immanent meaning of the work itself. Despite this historical dismissal, authorial intentions undeniably matter. A nuanced path through this impasse is offered by Stanley Fish, who posits that intention is not an external anchor, but an interpretive fact, construed within interpretive communities. Much like the text itself, intention requires careful analysis. It is entirely valid to ask, what exactly did Milton mean by justify the ways of God within his specific historical and cultural context? This approach allows for a sophisticated understanding, recognizing that intention too must be interpreted. #06. The Affective Fallacy. The journey of a literary work spans from an author's initial inspiration to a reader's final consumption. Critical examination can focus on any point along this arc, but fixating solely on one risks distortion. The affective fallacy describes the error of judging literature purely by its emotional impact, how it makes the reader feel. This perspective views a simple "I like it" as sidestepping genuine critical engagement, as profound insights can emerge even from disliking a work, and personal enjoyment doesn't always align with objective merit. This "I know what I like" stance, often associated with a Philistine complacency, was notably critiqued by figures like E.M. Forster. However, the commercial reality of literature underscores the common reader's reliance on emotional appeal. Genres like thrillers or romances are inherently designed to elicit specific feelings, and their success is often measured by that capacity. Furthermore, even refined literary taste often involves a visceral sensory response. Historically, readers openly displayed strong emotions, like public weeping at Dickens's Little Nell, a stark contrast to modern sensibilities that might find such reactions embarrassing. Thus, while emotional connection is an undeniable, even essential part of reading, critical understanding demands an analysis that transcends mere subjective feelings. Chapter 7. Narrative, Story. When discussing the art of fiction, two terms often arise: story and narrative. While seemingly interchangeable, they denote distinct aspects of literary creation, with story focusing on what is conveyed and narrative on how it is conveyed, the intricate techniques employed. Novelists have long been fascinated by the technical challenges of their craft, from 18th-century debates over epistolary methods to Dickens's experiments with bisected perspectives. This fascination reached its peak with Henry James, who argued that how a story is told is paramount. His Art of Fiction prefaces declared technique as almost divine, showcasing this doctrine in works like The Turn of the Screw. Here, James masterfully builds terror not by hammering in blunt facts, but by twisting the narrative gradually, like a screw, demonstrating that the artistry lies entirely in the telling. This emphasis on narrative spawned a sophisticated critical climate, introducing concepts such as implied readers and unreliable narrators. However, an over-reliance on narrative can be problematic. D.H. Lawrence warned against over-narrating, asserting that sometimes one must trust the tale, not the teller.
Marxist critic Walter Benjamin further noted that a strong narrative creates ownership of a story, a contrast to the unowned, adaptable folk tales like Cinderella. He provocatively declared the novel, a product of modern capitalism, represented the death of storytelling, as unique narrative voices solidify intellectual property in ways communal oral traditions never did. This tension between the what and the how, between the inherent power of the tale and the crafted precision of its narration, remains a central inquiry for both creators and critics.
Epic. The term epic, though frequently employed today as a casual intensifier for trivial events, once signified a profound literary form that has largely vanished. Traditionally, literary epics are characterized by their significant length, heroic narratives, nationalistic themes, and poetic structure, often incorporating elements of extended praise and lament. They exude confidence about humanity's purpose and render firm moral judgments, celebrating the hero's prowess while navigating tensions with inherited authority. Yet, this monumental genre has found the atmosphere of recent times uncongenial. Modern audiences largely eschew lengthy works, particularly poetry, favoring those that can be read at a sitting. Moreover, contemporary society often lacks or is uneasy with the traditional heroes steeped in honor that epics commemorate, preferring instead anti-heroes or the unheroic. Epics belong to a nostalgic past, often associated with noble and puissant nations, making their emergence difficult for smaller or nationally diffused cultures. Consequently, true literary epics have become the dinosaurs of literature, supplemented by the rise of the novel in the 18th century. While some novels are termed bourgeois epics, or films evoke an epic sensibility, these are ultimately allusions to a bygone, authentic form, not the thing itself. 9. Lyric prosody. Edgar Allan Poe asserted that the short lyric embodies poetry in its purest, most compressed form, suggesting that even lengthy poems are merely strings of such intense, jewel-like moments. This preference for brevity became even more pertinent in the accelerated pace of the modern world, aligning with Ezra Pound's call to make it new and, implicitly, keep it short. The lyric's inherent elasticity allowed it to readily accommodate stylistic shifts, embracing free verse and the subjective myself dimension evident in Walt Whitman's work. A fundamental strength of the lyric lies in its natural alignment with the English language, which functions as a stress-based system rather than a syllabic one. Pioneers like Gerald Manley Hopkins explored this through sprung rhythm, freeing verse from restrictive classical metrics and celebrating the organic stresses of speech. While poetry has seen a decline in printed form, yielding ground to the novel, the lyric has experienced a profound, if often unnoticed, resurgence. Its historical roots in verse set to musical accompaniment found a new, massive expression in the popular music of the late 20th century. Artists like Dylan and Lennon-McCartney propelled lyric into the airwaves, fulfilling Matthew Arnold's mid-19th century prophecy that poetry's future would be immense, though in a way he might not have envisioned. Chapter 10. Gothic. The term Gothic carries an intriguing paradox. While it now signifies a distinct literary genre of horror and dark fantasy, its historical namesake, the Goths, were notorious for their destructive campaigns against the Roman Empire, ushering in the Dark Ages and burning much classical literature. This lineage, far from creating literature, was associated with barbarism and ruination. Yet, Gothic emerged as a powerful literary idea. Freudian theory suggests that humans possess primal, destructive urges, which, when sublimated, find expression in socially acceptable forms. Gothic literature offers a therapeutic escape, an imaginary realm where the controls of order and reason are suspended, allowing for the safe exploration of these darker impulses. As the philosopher Hegel observed, the sleep of reason produces monsters, and audiences, respecting reason, simultaneously relish these monstrous creations in fiction. The genre traces its formal beginnings to Horace Walpole's 1764 novel, The Castle of Otranto, a fabricated translation brimming with supernatural events and dark melodrama. It profoundly resonated with the Romantic movement, which harbored doubts about the Enlightenment's absolute rationality. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, for instance, can be viewed as a critique of unchecked reason, transforming the scientist's quest for perfection into a grotesque abomination. Gothic literature provides a holiday from reason, provoking and then containing radically irrational responses. It allows us to grapple with evil, violence, and criminality, and to indulge complex, mixed feelings about them. This explains the enduring allure of figures like Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights, a character whose psychopathic brutality is inexplicably entwined with Byronic charisma. Through such narrative conventions, Gothic fiction uniquely reflects the perverse peculiarities and contradictory depths of the human personality. 11. The translation paradox. Translation, at its core, often presumes an essentialism, a belief that the fundamental meaning of something can be perfectly transferred across language barriers. The pursuit of equivalency guides translators, yet critics like Walter Benjamin observed that all translation is merely a provisional attempt to grapple with the inherent foreignness of languages. While scientific or technical data might allow for relatively straightforward equivalence, the rich tapestry of literature, with its intricate stylistic textures and reliance on nuance, presents a far greater challenge. Indeed, some scholars argue that the more literary a text, the less successful its translation will inevitably be. Humorous, yet illustrative, examples abound, such as the various attempts to render Shakespeare's Hamlet or the title of The Catcher in the Rye into other languages. These translations often diverge wildly, revealing how deeply a title's meaning is embedded in its original cultural and linguistic context. The Catcher in the Rye itself contains a poignant illustration of this. Holden Caulfield's misunderstanding of the Robert Burns poem Comin' Through the Rye highlights how even within the same language, different dialects and eras can create profound comprehension gaps, necessitating a form of translation across time and culture. The challenge intensifies when considering foundational texts like the Bible, where the very first lines of Genesis have yielded multiple distinct interpretations across different translations. This infinite capacity for disagreement often arises because many translations are themselves derived from earlier translations, further compounding layers of interpretation. Literary translators face a peculiar double bind. They must be faithful to the original, yet sometimes true equivalency can only be achieved by abandoning literal fidelity, in favor of conveying the same impact or point in the destination language. This paradox is encapsulated in the Italian proverb, traduttore traditore. English, with its vast lexicon of loan words and synonyms, poses particular difficulties for foreign translators, as nuances conveyed by words like Shakespeare's invented incarnadine are often difficult to match with a single, less potent word in another tongue. Moreover, translation is not merely a cross-national endeavor. It is also a journey across time. Few contemporary readers can comfortably engage with the original Anglo-Saxon of Beowulf or the Middle English of Chaucer without translation. Time, in this sense, alienates us from our own national literatures, turning us into Martians in our own linguistic history. Even Shakespeare, arguably the greatest writer in English, benefits from modernization for new readers, despite the inevitable limpness that can result from sacrificing poetic intensity for explicability. This raises the perennial question: can a translation ever surpass its original, or must there always be a degree of loss?
a bargaining process like Umberto Eco describes for a carpet in an Oriental bazaar. Despite these profound challenges and the often perceived impossibility, translation remains an indispensable function in a globalized world. As Vladimir Nabokov, a multilingual novelist, suggested, even the clumsiest of literal translation is 1,000 times more useful than the prettiest of paraphrase, underscoring the vital, if imperfect, role translation plays in bridging divides.
Chapter 12. Culture. Culture serves as the essential bedrock of a fulfilling existence, once theorized to fill the societal role previously occupied by religion. This perspective, championed by figures like T.S. Eliot, posits that literature stands as a primary component in shaping a nation's cultural identity. However, discussions around culture are often entangled with notions of class and societal hierarchy. Early thinkers such as Matthew Arnold viewed culture as a stabilizing force against societal upheaval. Yet he believed it to be primarily the domain of a privileged, civilized class, distinct from the uncultured populace. This elitist viewpoint suggests that high culture requires specific intellectual and aesthetic trappings, a sentiment echoed in James Baldwin's poignant reflection on his own cultural rootedness compared to that of a European peasant. Even T.S. Eliot, despite advocating for a robust, homogeneous national culture, expressed controversial views regarding the necessity of a unified religious and racial background. By the mid-20th century, these elitist definitions faced significant challenge. Voices from various backgrounds began to champion the intrinsic worth of working class and popular culture, exemplified by figures like D.H. Lawrence, who celebrated raw, unvarnished experiences. This growing movement led to the establishment of cultural studies as an academic discipline, aiming to broaden the scope of cultural inquiry beyond traditional canons. While this expansion democratized the study of culture, critics like Alan Bloom warned that by encompassing everything and anything, cultural studies risked diluting meaningful discourse and leading to the closing of the American mind. These tensions culminated in the culture wars of the late 20th century, debates reflecting a fundamental clash over whose culture merits recognition and preservation. Chapter 13. Milieu. The concept of milieu, a French term signifying a socio-literary context, proves surprisingly complex when applied to literature. While loosely defined, it encompasses the intricate social, historical, and cultural backdrop from which a work emerges, often resisting neat categorization. For instance, understanding F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby involves navigating influences like the Jazz Age, the Roaring Twenties, and the Lost Generation, a multitude of interacting circumstances that make isolating a single milieu challenging. More defined are coteries, analogous mutually creative companies where writers share beliefs, concepts, and practices, even without constant social interaction, as seen with the Bloomsbury Group. The renowned triad of race, milieu, and moment proposed by Hippolyte Taine highlights the contextual forces shaping literature. While milieu and moment can powerfully illuminate the soil from which literature grows, serving to stage a work for richer understanding, the element of race has proven problematic and lacks valid literary critical application. Crucially, these contexts background a work. They do not fully explain literary genius. However, for contemporary authors, globalization and increased mobility often result in a shifting series of flickering milieus rather than a stable, singular context for their work. Chapter 14. Base Superstructure. The base superstructure model, originating from Marxist theory, posits that society's economic structure, the base, forms the real foundation for its legal, political, and cultural superstructure. As articulated by George Orwell, the strenuous labor of material producers directly underpins the refined existence of superior individuals,
underscoring that economic necessity always precedes cultural flourishing. Superstructural activities, like literature, are products of surplus value, requiring leisure, wealth, and developed infrastructure. Simple cultural forms need minimal investment, whereas complex works, from Renaissance plays to modern blockbusters, are deeply intertwined with specific economic and industrial advancements. Even a writer's remuneration offers insight into how the economic base shapes creative output. Yet, this model risks reductionism, oversimplifying the dynamic between material producers and those who shape societal consciousness. It prompts questions about potential antagonism between these groups, exemplified by H.G. Wells' Eloy and Morlocks, and whether consciousness and production are exclusive to distinct levels. A more sophisticated view acknowledges creativity across all societal strata and recognizes that the superstructure actively produces ideas that can, reciprocally, influence and transform the economic base. Ultimately, the base superstructure model offers a valuable, metaphorical starting point, guiding us toward a more intricate and integrated understanding of society. 15. The canon. The term canon, originally an ancient Greek word for measuring rod, first gained prominence in Christian theological discourse to designate authentic biblical texts, distinguishing them from apocryphal discards. Over time, its meaning expanded to signify texts deemed essential reading for devout Catholics, often juxtaposed against those listed in the Index Librorum Prohibitorum. This historical link reveals that the concepts of canon and censorship have always been closely allied, both deriving their power from authority. In a literary context, the idea of a canon now describes a core body of literature considered worthy of academic study, destined for classic reprint libraries, or prescribed in foundational courses. Before the 1960s, this term was largely unfamiliar in literary circles. Today, the literary canon represents an exclusive domain, fiercely debated in what have become known as canon wars. While its central figures, such as Shakespeare or Virginia Woolf, remain largely fixed, their positions are not entirely immutable. At its periphery, the canon's membership is as shifting and indistinct as contemporary bestseller lists, with authors like H.G. Wells or Rebecca West occasionally moving in and out of inclusion. Educationally, the primary purpose of the canon is to separate, as Matthew Arnold put it, the best that has been thought and said in the world, to harvest literature's richest offerings. However, it serves a crucial secondary function, managing the ever-growing volume of literature. Unlike ephemeral consumables, literature accrues over time. In Chaucer's era, a scholar might own a mere half-dozen books. Today, digital projects provide access to millions of volumes. The need for a literary canon arose precisely because printing dramatically expanded the available literary store, from a modest hillock to an insurmountable mountain. The canon, therefore, tends to be fixed in size, while the non-canonical literature expands relentlessly, echoing the classical proverb, vita brevis ars longa, life is short, art is long, a problem that only compounds with time. Early attempts at literary canon making include Samuel Johnson's mid-18th century Lives of the Most Eminent Poets, which nominated 52 writers. However, it was at the close of the 19th century, amidst the rise of mass literary culture, that canonization truly accelerated. Classic reprint libraries, such as Everyman and World's Classics, emerged to condense the vast literary landscape into a manageable 100 or so essential texts for the well-read citizen. Simultaneously, anthologies like Palgrave's Golden Treasuries standardized curricula for students, and bestseller lists further refined the must-reads of any given moment. Reduction was the guiding principle behind these efforts. The small, fixed body of classical Latin and Greek literature, or Anglo-Saxon poetry, historically made these fields ideal for academic study. Modern literature, by contrast, is far from compact. With hundreds of thousands of new titles published annually and millions already cataloged in major libraries, a contemporary scholar would need to live an impossibly long life to read even a fraction. Educational institutions, including universities and national curriculum authorities, have become adept at winnowing the canon to an almost anorexic degree. A typical one-semester Great Books course in the U.S. might allow 90 to 100 hours of reading, enough for perhaps Moby Dick and Hamlet, leading to the necessity of prescribing mere chapters, short poems, or antholized excerpts. This pedagogical compromise means that a course on Victorian fiction might include only a handful of novels, offering no more insight into the 70,000-plus works of that era than a few pebbles reveal an entire beach. Despite this, educational institutions must devise some method of selection. Beyond the mainstream, countless alternative canons exist: feminist, queer, science fiction, national, each reflecting the specific interests and affiliations of different groups, demonstrating the subjective and diverse nature of literary value.
Genre. Genre is a term whose meaning shifts depending on one's perspective within the literary sphere. For booksellers, it serves as a pragmatic system for shelving and organizing the vast array of titles, driven by commercial demand that categories like romance, science fiction, or crime. What once included westerns might now feature graphic novels, reflecting evolving tastes. For authors, however, genre represents a distinct club with its own established rules, conventions, styles, and fashions. Within these frameworks, there's a degree of creative freedom, yet shared tools and subject matter prevail. Successful innovative ideas, such as the legal thriller or a compelling plot device, what Alfred Hitchcock termed a MacGuffin, are often picked up, recycled, and profitably developed. This Me Tooism is not only sanctioned but often encouraged, with major imprints providing templates to cater to readers' desire for comforting familiarity. Genre also fosters vibrant social communities, evidenced by writers' clubs, associations that award specialized prizes like the Edgar or Hugo, distinct from those for high literature, and large conventions where devoted fans gather. These readers are often voracious consumers of their preferred fictional fare, driving genre writers to be remarkably prolific. While the novel is a broader form, genre functions as a smaller, contained subdivision, most naturally at home within fiction. The imaginative energies of creative fiction are thought to disseminate in two ways: either trickle down from literary masters, or, more plausibly, by exploding volcanically from below, suggesting genre is the primal magma from which literature finds its existence. Increasingly, the boundaries between hard-boiled genre and high literature are melting, leading to fascinating cross-pollinations, a phenomenon some describe as degeneracy. Chapter 17. Closure. Humanity seems inherently wired to seek narrative endings and a sense of closure, a predisposition perhaps as fundamental as our capacity for language. This drive transforms the simple passage of time, such as a clock's tick-tick, into a perceived tick-tock, imbuing it with a genesis and an apocalypse. Grand societal narratives, from religious texts to philosophical manifestos, often adhere to a triadic structure of beginning, middle, and end, shaping our perception of smaller stories. While popular and children's literature affirm these clear resolutions, major works often explore, challenge, or even subvert conventional endings. Authors like Dickens, with his varied conclusions for Great Expectations, demonstrate how narrative choices reflect differing worldviews. Modern authors further play with these expectations, as seen in Umberto Eco's deliberate denial of conventional closure, prompting us to examine why we crave resolution rather than simply providing it.
Ultimately, literature reveals not the ultimate meaning of our lives, but the profound human impulse to construct meaning through beginnings and ends.
Chapter 18. Paradigm Shift. The term paradigm shift, popularized by science historian Thomas M. Kuhn, offers profound insight into the progression of knowledge, particularly in explaining why experts within a field often find themselves at odds. Kuhn observed that scientific advancement unfolds in three distinct phases, each revolving around what he called a paradigm, a dominant theoretical framework or meaningful pattern. Initially, a pre-paradigmatic stage is characterized by a vigorous, bubbling intellectual soup of competing ideas, none yet achieving widespread acceptance. Eventually, one theory solidifies, becoming normal, and a community of adherents forms to confirm and fiercely defend its core tenets. Careers and eminence become invested in preserving this ruling paradigm, and dissent is frequently viewed as heresy. This normal phase, however, is not static. It can only be dislodged by a revolutionary assault. If successful, this leads to a paradigm shift, a fundamental transformation akin to a dramatic scene change in theater, ushering in an entirely new normality. For instance, the scientific community's shift from the steady-state universe theory to the Big Bang model perfectly illustrates such a profound revolution. Kuhn insisted that all paradigms are, by their very nature, provisional. Intriguingly, Kuhn's model also illuminates historical shifts within literature. Literary history reveals similar periods of dominant styles and schools, often overthrown by new manifestos and movements. The Augustans' mission to refine English literature, the Romantics rejecting gaudy phraseology, and modernists like D.H. Lawrence and James Joyce challenging genteel Edwardianism all exemplify these paradigm shifts. These revolutions are seldom quiet. They are fiercely resisted by those invested in the old ways, as seen in the vitriolic attacks on Joyce's Ulysses. However, a crucial distinction emerges. While science demonstrates clear advancement where the newest theories supersede older ones, no one studies Copernican cosmology as an alternative to Stephen Hawking's. Literature's progress is less straightforward. New literary movements change, challenge, and redefine, but they do not necessarily render older works obsolete. William Shakespeare and Alfred Noyes coexist alongside contemporary authors. Literature, therefore, represents a constant, sometimes conflictual, quest to adjust to a changing present, rather than a linear ascent.
Chapter 19. Ownership. Imagine purchasing a new car, seemingly yours, yet invisibly bound by thousands of patent liens. Literary ownership presents an even deeper paradox. How can a creator sell a novel only for it to be perpetually identified as theirs, passing through publishers, booksellers, and readers? Copyright, a finely crafted legal framework, hinges on the concept of a primal owner, or author, a notion that evolved over time, as ancient works like Gilgamesh or folktales attest to collective origins. The digital realm has intensified this complexity, creating a lightless literary candy store where traditional copyright struggles to keep pace. While the 1710 copyright law primarily protected the immaterial form of words for trade, not ideas, a freedom enabling genre development, this distinction complicates modern challenges like creative paraphrasing. European-influenced moral rights now offer creators some recourse against the appropriation of their work's expressive heart, yet the law, like Hamlet, moves slowly, grappling with an internet that has profoundly redefined literary ownership. 21. Style. Style is the enduring hallmark of a writer, a valuable personal investment that allows one to play like yourself over time, as literary giants like Raymond Chandler and musicians like Miles Davis observed. Everyone possesses a unique linguistic fingerprint, an idiolect, which is as distinct as DNA.
This individual imprint can even be forensically identified. Professor Dawn Foster, for instance, famously attributed the anonymous novel Primary Colors to Joe Klein through his distinct prose patterns, a technique also applied in criminal investigations. Linguistically, our idiolect is our parole, the individual expression of language, distinguished from lang, the vast theoretical pool of all linguistic possibilities. This personal coloring of our writing makes us intrinsically recognizable. Literary figures like Wordsworth and Scott were known for styles so distinctive they could be identified instantly. Indeed, as Sainte-Beuve famously declared, style is the man himself. While national, period, and genre styles also exist, discerning an author's unique voice within these broader trends remains a sophisticated literary challenge. Despite being locked into one's idiolect, skilled writers often aim to transcend it through techniques like free indirect discourse. This narrative method allows the author to seamlessly blend their voice with a character's thoughts, creating an immersive experience. Virginia Woolf, a master of FIS, exemplified how an author's distinct tang can still subtly permeate a character's internal monologue, even while offering a vivid glimpse into another mind. Ultimately, cultivating a truly individual and impactful style is a demanding but deeply rewarding pursuit. 22. Allegory. Allegory is literature's ingenious technique of conveying one meaning by overtly expressing another, functioning as an extended system rather than a fleeting device. This rich method allows authors to cast complex ideas into memorable narrative forms. Plato's Allegory of the Cave, for instance, powerfully elucidates the human condition's limitations on knowledge, embedding a profound philosophical concept in an unforgettable image rather than a dry exposition. Allegory serves not only to beautify and crystallize, but also to render abstract truths accessible and enduring. Despite its enduring power, allegory has faced critique. Edgar Allan Poe, for one, believed it undermined the unity of effect essential to realism. However, thinkers like Schopenhauer championed allegory's role in making intricate ideas such as religious doctrine, philosophical insights, or even economic crises digestible for a broader audience. He argued that just as pure oxygen requires dilution to be breathable, pure truth often needs allegorical expression to be assimilated by the masses. While once a more overt device, allegory persists in modern literature as a subtle texture, inviting sophisticated readers to hold multiple layers of meaning in tension, whether perceiving social commentary in The War of the Worlds or psychological depth in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Ultimately, literature, through allegory, offers not a single unvarnished truth, but a tapestry of many truths compressed into their full complexity. 23. Irony. At its essence, irony involves expressing one idea while intending its direct opposite. This rhetorical device shares a kinship with allegory and metaphor in its indirect approach to communication, yet its purpose diverges sharply. Unlike allegory, which often simplifies complex notions, irony thrives on making straightforward ideas more elusive and multifaceted, thereby reflecting life's inherent ambiguity. Its Greek etymological root, ironeia, signifies deception or hypocrisy, hinting at how irony suggests that falsehoods can, paradoxically, reveal deeper truths. Irony frequently appears alongside sarcasm, satire, subversion, and skepticism, often relying on vocal inflection to convey its true meaning. A seemingly positive statement like, "That's terrific," can signify profound dismay. Modern literature teems with such inversions, from Evelyn Waugh's Decline and Fall, which ironically juxtaposes 1930s London with Imperial Rome, to Orwell naming 1984's protagonist Winston Smith, an ironic blend of wartime greatness and utter anonymity. Readers should remain plainly aware of this pervasive subtlety. Thomas Hardy's works exemplify irony as a pervasive worldview that relentlessly chips away at idealism, optimism, and faith. His poem In the Cemetery vividly illustrates human insignificance against a backdrop of cosmic indifference, as grieving families squabble over graves whose contents have long since been consolidated. Similarly, when Shakespeare's future King Richard III declares, "Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York," his knowing Lear, as captured by Laurence Olivier, reveals a menacing ironic foretelling of much darker days ahead. The late 20th century saw a fervent trend toward reinterpreting classical literature through an ironic lens. Works previously read at face value were re-examined for hidden layers of meaning, often overturning long-held understandings. Othello, for instance, was transformed from the story of a noble Moor to one whose final self-praising speech is viewed ironically, suggesting he dies ignorant and unrepentant. W. W. Jacobs' The Monkey's Paw stands as a classic illustration where wishes are granted with devastating, literal irony, highlighting the cruel twists of fate. This interpretive power allows authors to engage in clever games with their audience, as when Graham Greene later revealed that the honorable Scobie in The Heart of the Matter was, in fact, an utter prig. Wayne C. Booth's distinction between stable irony, like Gulliver's Travels' controlled satire of Lilliput, and unstable irony, Swift's seemingly unbound rage against humanity in the Houyhnhnm section, further illuminates the device's variable nature. Ultimately, deciphering irony can foster a sense of intellectual superiority, as one perceives truths others might overlook. 24. Imagery. Imagery in literature refers to the mental pictures and sensory experiences words evoke, distinct from the act of physically reading marks on a page. While some critics debate whether over-visualization distracts from the text, imagery is often considered vital for a comprehensive appreciation of literary works, engaging what Wordsworth called the mind's eye. Historically, poetic movements like early 20th century imagism, influenced by Eastern ideograms, aimed to condense complex ideas into single, immediate images. Ezra Pound, for instance, famously distilled a lengthy narrative into a vivid, succinct image. Similarly, Shakespeare profoundly utilized clusters of imagery, such as references to hidden infection in Hamlet or blood in Macbeth, to establish thematic leitmotifs that resonate throughout his plays, a technique that can be traced to Renaissance emblem books. Crucially, literary imagery extends beyond the purely visual. It can activate all senses. One might smell an image, as in Lady Macbeth's hallucinatory scent of blood, feel an image of clinging guilt, or taste a description as rich as Keats's Hippocrene. Prose writers also employ powerful imagery. Dickens's description of London fog in Bleak House, for example, serves as an extended metaphor for the obfuscating legal system. Paradoxically, imagery can also serve to conceal rather than clarify. Sigmund Freud saw dream imagery as a mechanism for disguising latent, often dangerous meanings. Whether clarifying or concealing, imagery is a fundamental literary device that enriches, crystallizes, and deepens understanding. Chapter 25. Allusion. Allusion serves as a deliberate literary device, visibly and knowingly connecting a work to other texts, distinguishing it from general intertextuality. Authors employ allusion to enrich perspective, complicate meaning, and create layers of literary resonance, often presuming a well-read audience. Allusions can be intra- or extra-literary, referring to ideas within or beyond books, shaping a narrative's overarching themes, or even an entire work's title. For instance, titles like Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart or Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men draw potent connections to earlier poems, imbuing their narratives with profound historical or philosophical weight. Master allusionists such as T.S. Eliot weave extensive networks of references, not as mere displays of erudition, but as foundational frameworks that assert a modern poet's engagement with established literary traditions.
Ultimately, the ability to discern and appreciate illusions deepens one's understanding, persuasively underscoring the value of wide and deep reading. 26. Defamiliarization. The technique of defamiliarization, or ostranenie in Russian, championed by Viktor Shklovsky, posits that art's true purpose is to renew our perception of the world. It aims to make familiar objects and ideas seem strange again, bypassing automatic recognition to evoke fresh sensation. As Shklovsky famously put it, art should make the stone stony. This effect allows us to truly perceive, rather than merely know, an object or concept, much like literature that captivates us completely, making its content unforgettable. Poets, from Aristotle to Coleridge, have long understood this, striving to tear away the film of familiarity, to prevent psychic automation and cultivate genuine understanding. Bertolt Brecht later developed this concept into his alienation effect, or Verfremdungseffekt, in theater, preferring the term distanciation to avoid confusion with social alienation. Brecht opposed the audience being carried away by a performance, instead wanting them to maintain critical distance. He sought to lay bare the device, making sets look like sets and actors visibly perform, thereby fostering a critical rather than purely emotional response. His teaching pieces, Lehrstücke, aimed to provoke thought about social issues, exemplified by his portrayal of Mother Courage as a capitalist to avoid sentimentalizing her. This focus on estrangement emerged historically in the 1920s and 30s as a counter to totalitarian pressures that sought to homogenize experience and quell questioning. In stark contrast to Brecht's cerebral approach stood Konstantin Stanislavski's theory, advocating emotional empathy. For Stanislavski, actors, and by extension, the audience, must get inside a character, becoming Hamlet rather than merely playing him. His method acting, influential on performers like Marlon Brando, emphasized a deep personal kinship between actor and role, believing intense sympathy was the key to understanding. The artistic tension between Stanislavski's emotional identification and Brecht's intellectual defamiliarization continues to shape theater and art into the 21st century. 27. Bricolage. The concept of bricolage, introduced by anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss, describes creation from whatever materials come to hand, a resourceful approach akin to DIY. Lévi-Strauss observed myth as a form of pensée sauvage, or primitive mind bricolage, where existing knowledge explains phenomena, much like attributing thunder to an angry Zeus. This stands in contrast to the scientific method, which begins from ignorance, actively seeking new understanding. In literature, bricolage is exemplified by characters such as Wemmick from Great Expectations, who constructs his distinctive home from scavenged items. More broadly, narratives themselves evolve through bricolage. Early science fiction, like Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World, 1912, found its plausibility in then unexplored global regions. Decades later, Jurassic Park, late 20th century, ingeniously utilized contemporary genetic science and amber-preserved mosquitoes to craft its dinosaurian scenario. Similarly, H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, 1895, drew on contemporary ideas of Martian canals and British imperial dominance. Subsequent adaptations, whether Orson Welles' 1939 radio drama tapping into WW2 anxieties or the 1953 film reflecting UFO paranoia, each recast the alien invasion using the fears and scientific understanding at their time. Such enduring works become bricolages, continually assembling their stories from the era's societal concerns and technological frontiers. Fundamentally, bricolage differs from collage, which merely affixes disconnected elements without inherent form, and montage, which arranges disparate items serially. Bricolage, in contrast, strives to build an integrated, meaningful structure from its diverse, found components. Chapter 28. Metafiction. Metafiction describes narratives that are keenly aware of their own literary construction and their place within a vast, accumulating history of stories. Far from being a modern invention, elements of this self-consciousness can be traced back to foundational works like Don Quixote, which playfully parodied existing chivalric romances. Forms such as literary parody, homage fiction, mock epic, and knowing variations on folkloric themes all embody this derivative quality, requiring readers to recognize their literary predecessors. The novelist Raymond Fetterman preferred the term surfiction, suggesting a literature that surfs the wave of history, constantly exploring its own possibilities and exposing the inherent fictionality of reality itself. This self-awareness often manifests as a narcissism, a direct acknowledgement to the reader of the text's own artifice, as famously seen in Lawrence Sterne's Tristram Shandy. As the literary corpus expands at an accelerating rate, the pursuit of true originality becomes an ever more elusive goal. Metafiction offers a potent strategy for this challenge by revisiting and reimagining older narratives, injecting them with modern sensibilities and twists. This literary recidivism has yielded a rich harvest of contemporary works, from post-Victorian Victorian novels to satirical genre explorations, demonstrating that literature can perpetually renew itself through conscious engagement with its own past. As the body of literature continues to grow, so too, it seems, will the prominence of fiction about fiction. 29. Solidity of specification. Henry James's phrase, solidity of specification, defines a supreme virtue in narrative, the quality that gives a text its essential air of reality. This realism often springs from seemingly insignificant, unmotivated details, like the mismatched shoes found by Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. Particulars that serve no direct plot purpose, yet profoundly anchor the fictional world. While some authors, like Defoe, revel in abundant factual detail, others, such as Jane Austen, achieve realism through different narrative means, relying on intricate character dynamics and internal monologue rather than extensive physical description. The art lies in judicious application. Too much detail risks a repulsive dryness, as Walter Scott noted, while over-motivated details can make a story's construction feel transparent. Ultimately, authors must employ tact, providing just enough accidental, authentic detail to create a compelling, believable narrative, understanding that certain details, initially appearing unmotivated, might reveal their deeper significance only as the story unfolds. This careful balance ensures a fictional world feels robust and present without over-explaining everything. 30. Structuralism. Literature, while consumed linearly, is often discussed and even conceived in spatial terms, as a form or structure. Yet, unlike a static sculpture, the meaning of a literary work is largely constructed by the reader, who actively assembles clues into a coherent narrative. Structuralism elucidates this process, proposing that meaning is not intrinsic to an object, act, or text, but rather conferred by underlying systems of rules or invisible cultural frameworks, a concept known as structuration. For example, a simple kick of a ball gains the meaning of a goal only within the established rules of football. This analytical lens reveals how cultural structures imbue everyday items, like specific dishes, with symbolic significance beyond their physical properties. While structuralism initially offered an exhilarating, clear-cut approach to understanding meaning, post-structuralism emerged as a more nuanced evolution, challenging the former's neatness with ragged-edged interpretations. Critics of structuralism, particularly in its application to literature, highlight its immateriality and ahistorical nature, which can overlook the varied experiences of readers across different eras. Furthermore, its tendency to imply a singular, authoritative meaning within a text often clashes with the reality of diverse and evolving interpretations.
31. Deconstruction. Deconstruction, a critical idea often widely misunderstood, represents a profound challenge to conventional understanding, proposing that engaging with texts involves an unending cycle of constructing and then dismantling meaning, leaving no definitive interpretation. This process ultimately leads to a state of aporia, a complete intellectual deadlock where no clear path forward or back exists. Emerging notably with Jacques Derrida's 1966 lecture at Johns Hopkins University, it rapidly gained traction in American academia, evolving into a dominant, if controversial, theory. Despite its seemingly pessimistic conclusion about indeterminate meaning, deconstruction posits that the very act of creating meaning, however provisional, serves as our sole anchor against an abyss of meaninglessness. This perspective likens authors and readers to tightrope walkers, compelled to navigate the precarious wire of interpretation rather than plummet into chaos. For instance, a simple phrase like, "What's the difference?" can carry vastly different implications depending on context and intention, from a genuine query to dismissive indifference. Similarly, a poetic line questioning the separation of dancer from the dance highlights the profound fragility and perpetual deferral of definitive meaning. At its heart, deconstruction asserts that meaning is perpetually deferred, always shifting, and never fully settled. While initially offering a powerfully challenging lens for critics to disrupt established interpretations, the movement itself faced significant scrutiny. Revelations concerning one of its influential proponents' wartime writings, which contained anti-Semitic remarks, profoundly complicated its legacy, leading to its own intellectual deconstruction. 32. Textuality. Literary creations are viewed in fundamentally different ways depending on whether one is an author or a critic. Historically, writers like Dickens crafted works, novels, plays, and poems, perceiving them as complete objects of art. For these creators, the term text was often reserved for religious or academic discourse. However, contemporary critics increasingly approach literature as texts, a relatively recent shift that involves textualization, the process of dissolving diverse literary forms into a singular primary literary material for analysis. This redefinition allows for a broader spectrum of critical inquiry. One such area is intertextuality, which posits that all texts exist in a dialogue with others, meaning readers interpret a work through the lens of everything else they have read. Another is paratextuality, focusing on elements traditionally considered external but now seen as integral, such as titles, epigraphs, or typography. Subtextuality allows for the examination of submerged meanings or repressed themes within a work, without delving into the author's psychology. Contextuality places literary works within broader environments, sometimes even suggesting that context precedes the text itself. The most daring extension is pantextuality, which proposes that not only literature, but the entire perceived world is a text, an idea suggesting that reality itself is read, rather than simply experienced empirically. Authors often resent this critical approach, viewing it as an intrusion that presumes to understand their creations better than they do. Yet, the distinction between a work and a text is profound for criticism. A work is often seen as an achieved, inviolable objet d'art to be appreciated and reverenced, a museum piece. A text, by contrast, suggests a dynamic field of activity, where the reader or critic is free to analyze, deconstruct, or even remake what is on the page. While appreciation can lead to critical belletrism, an attempt to match literary elegance in commentary, now often viewed with disdain, textualism invites a more scientific, laboratory-like dissection. This process shifts ownership. If the author creates the work, the critic often lays claim to the text. Figures like Roland Barthes have famously asserted the death of the author, suggesting the creator's authority must be metaphorically nullified for the text to be truly read.
reducing the author to a mere scripter or an effect within the text itself. Double bind. A double bind describes situations where conflicting demands, typically from an authority, create paralysis by forcing an inherently unfair choice. Distinct from a simple dilemma, it focuses on the coercive frame rather than the individual's decision, always implying an unequal power dynamic. Andrew Marvell's To His Coy Mistress exemplifies this. The suitor pressures the mistress with a false choice between submission and lonely, unfulfilled oblivion, revealing his manipulative power. This concept is vital in literature. Anna Karenina's tragic conflict between passion and duty is a double bind. George Orwell's 1984 features institutionalized doublethink, compelling acceptance of contradictory truths. Joseph Heller's Catch-22 famously defines the paradox. A pilot's sanity in wanting to avoid missions ironically requires him to fly them. The idea extends to post-colonial writers asserting identity in the colonizer's language, and to Harold Bloom's Anxiety of Influence, where poets must be both original and shaped by predecessors. Ultimately, the double bind directs attention from personal choices to the larger, often unjust societal frameworks that restrict freedom. 34. Postmodernism. Once a term reserved for subversive art, postmodern, or POMO to the initiated, has expanded its reach, now encompassing diverse fields from law and architecture to journalism and cuisine. This influential concept defines itself primarily in relation to modernism, a term itself indicating both a specific historical period, roughly 1890 to 1930, and a broader artistic movement. Modernists, including figures like Pound, Eliot, and Joyce, actively theorized their work, rallying under Ezra Pound's stirring call, "Make it new." They sought to break from established styles, reject mass publics, and saw literature as progressing through radical improvement, even sedition. However, modernism eventually became assimilated and tamed, its once shocking works like Ulysses turning into academic assignments. It was in this context that postmodernism emerged, specifically around 1968, positioning itself not merely as modernism's successor, but its violent antithesis. While modernism, despite its innovations, retained an underlying rationality, postmodernism launched a radical break, questioning the very act of making sense. It extended its critique beyond modernism to the Enlightenment itself, viewing even atrocities like the French Terror or the Holocaust as grim products of rationalized thought. Postmodernism thus champions continual disarticulation and fracturing, seeing it as the only path forward. Its manifestations range from the deliberate silence of Samuel Beckett's plays to the chaotic, illogical lateralities of the World Wide Web, suggesting an exciting but ultimately self-exhausting interlude before a potential return to the mainstream. 35. Heteroglossia. The concept of heteroglossia, a term roughly translating to many-voicedness, gained prominence in Western literary discourse through the work of Russian philosopher and critic Mikhail Bakhtin. Living under challenging conditions, including internal exile, Bakhtin theorized about the multifaceted nature of prose fiction, introducing heteroglossia and the closely related idea of polyphony. While polyphony describes the presence of multiple voices within a text, heteroglossia delves deeper, analyzing the social origins and implications embedded within those voices and the very words they use. Bakhtin posited that language is not a neutral medium. Rather, every word arrives contaminated by previous usage, saturated with ideology, class associations, and history.
He distinguished heteroglossia from polyphony by emphasizing how words carry conflicting social meanings. For instance, Hamlet's abrupt command to Ophelia, "Get thee to a nunnery," can be interpreted in two starkly different ways: as a plea for her to preserve her purity in a convent, or as a vulgar dismissal, using nunnery as slang for a brothel. This illustrates how a single word can simultaneously hold a centripetal, official, esteemed, meaning, and a centrifugal, colloquial, lower-class meaning, reflecting a tension between social strata. Authority, whether ecclesiastical, governmental, or institutional, typically seeks to monopolize language, attempting to impose a single unequivocal meaning. However, language inherently resists such control, and literature, through devices like heteroglossia, elevates this resistance into an art form. By reinserting the literary text into its real-world social context, heteroglossia allows for a richer analysis that encompasses political, historical, and sociological dimensions. The class implications within language are evident even in everyday terms. For example, the differing English words for animal and meat, e.g., bull, beef, reflect the historical dominance of Norman French speakers at the dining table over Saxon laborers in the fields. Centuries before Bacon, English critics like Dr. Samuel Johnson recognized this social stratification within words, as demonstrated by his disdain for Shakespeare's use of "dunnest" in Macbeth, a word he associated with the low, smelly stable. Bacon's work thus provides a framework for understanding how language is perpetually at war with itself, reflecting the inherent complexities and conflicts of human society.
36. New Historicism. New Historicism emerged in the 1970s as a significant school of literary criticism, offering a distinctive approach to understanding nonfiction source material. Rather than merely situating a literary work within its historical context, it interprets small, often overlooked historical particulars or anecdotes to unveil the broader behavioral codes, underlying logics, and driving forces of an entire society. This methodology contrasts sharply with earlier forms of historicism, which sometimes produced overly simplistic or reductive explanations, treating literature merely as a byproduct of its era. New historicism, conversely, strives for greater complexity, consciously viewing both literary texts and historical circumstances as texts that can be read and interpreted. It famously asserts the historicity of texts and the textuality of history, seeking actively subversive rather than passively reflective aspects of culture. For instance, understanding the specific, liminal location of Elizabethan theaters, situated in Southwark alongside brothels and bear-baiting pits, can illuminate the drama of the period as inherently dissident and anti-authoritarian. Stephen Greenblatt, a key founder of this school, was influenced by neo-Marxist thought, leading to interpretations such as The Tempest as a critique of imperialism. Drawing inspiration from anthropologist Clifford Geertz, New Historicism often derives profound cultural insights from a single illustrative datum, rather than amassing extensive contextual information. While some critics view its magpie approach as unsystematic or ideologically biased, New Historicism remains an accessible and illuminating innovation in literary analysis, revealing the profound and intricate connection between cultural productions and their historical environments. 37. Post-colonialism. The decay of imperial prejudices, which long minimized literatures from former colonies, birthed post-colonial writing. Though the USA lacks its own direct corpus, concepts like negritude and alterity have influenced African American literature. Its rise was threefold. British publishers actively sought new voices from decolonizing nations, e.g. Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. Academics returning from former colonies introduced these literatures into curricula. And a cultural introspection, fueled by guilt over colonialism, gained traction,
e.g., William Golding's Lord of the Flies, reversing colonial tropes. Post-colonialism transformed the literary landscape by patronizing diverse voices, integrating into global academic curricula, and emphasizing authenticity. This led to critical reevaluations, such as Edward Said uncovering colonial economics in Jane Austen's Mansfield Park, or Jean Rhys's Wide Sargasso Sea offering a counter-narrative to Jane Eyre. Chinua Achebe's denouncement of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness as racist profoundly shifted its perception and academic standing. However, post-colonial writers face challenges. They must navigate the poisoned wells of the English language for a predominantly Anglophone readership. Their dependence on Anglo-American publishers and the allure of Western accolades like knighthoods or Nobel Prizes raise questions about the true authenticity and marginality of their work. 38. Semiology. How does a mere diagonal line transform a walk signal into a don't walk command? This potent shift unveils the essence of semiology, the science of signs, which asserts that communication hinges on the encoding, transmission, and decoding of these fundamental units. Pioneered by Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure, semiology became a crucial lens for understanding language and literature. Saussure introduced key binary distinctions. He focused on synchronic study, how language functions at a given moment, over diachronic, its historical evolution. He also separated langue, the vast underlying language system, from parole, individual speech acts. Most influentially, Saussure explored the arbitrary relationship between the signifier, the sign itself, like a word, and the signified, the concept it points to, illustrating that meaning often emerges from the differences between signs rather than an inherent connection. This means even subtle variations, like the capitalization of Jew versus Jew, can dramatically alter significance. In literature, semiotics draws attention to the signifying potential of elements beyond words, such as typography and punctuation. James Joyce's use of continental speech notation, for example, prioritizes narrative flow over explicit quotation marks. Umberto Eco, a virtuoso of semiotics, embodied these insights in his novel The Name of the Rose, a work that allegorizes humanity's ongoing, often unfulfilled quest for a definitive signified meaning within our inherently symbolic world. 39. Reception theory. Reception theory, also known as reader response criticism, shifts the focus of literary meaning from the author or the text itself to the reader's experience. It posits that a work's meaning is not inherently fixed, but rather shaped by how it is received. This approach arose in West Germany during the 1960s, driven by figures like Hans Robert Jauss and Wolfgang Iser, perhaps as a response to the rigid ideological uniformity of earlier eras. A central challenge to this perspective is the inherent subjectivity. Millions of readers will engage with a text across different times and contexts, leading to vastly diverse interpretations. This critical framework often examines three key areas: the various media through which literature reaches its audience, the distinction between an author's implied reader and a real individual reader, and the dynamic between a single reader's interpretation and the collective reading public. The material form of a book significantly influences its reception. For instance, the content offered at railway stations in the 19th century was deliberately curated, altering what travelers encountered. Readers themselves are not uniform. An author might envision an ideal reader, as Henry James did, while a text can also directly address a textualized reader, like Jane Eyre speaking to her audience. Different cultures have developed unique facets of reception theory. Roland Barthes in France distinguished between readerly texts, which enforce a singular meaning, and writerly texts, which remain open for the reader to actively co-create meaning. In Britain, Stuart Hall proposed that readers engage with texts in three ways: accepting the dominant authorial message, actively opposing it, or arriving at a negotiated compromise. American interpretations, championed by critics such as Jane Tompkins, often celebrate the democratic empowerment of the reader, granting them ultimate authority over meaning. However, this raises the danger of unchecked subjectivity, as seen in the Nazi distortion of Leon Feuchtwanger's anti-racist novel. To counter this, Stanley Fish suggested that interpretive communities stabilize meanings through shared discussion, though even these communities, and consequently the meanings they construct, are subject to change over time. The historical mapping of bestseller lists from late 19th century magazines to modern sales data offers a practical demonstration of how collective reception can be tracked.
40. Sexual politics. Feminist thought took root in academia, notably within English departments, amidst the political liberation movements of the 1960s. A seminal work, Kate Millett's 1970 Sexual Politics, revolutionized literary analysis by framing it through the lens of power. Millett meticulously examined classic male-authored texts, contending that seemingly biological sexual relationships were, in essence, rooted in force and served to perpetuate a systemic patriarchy, a historical oppression of women reflected and reinforced by literature. She drew parallels between these literary depictions and cultural subjugations, such as foot-binding or the veil. Across the Atlantic, Germaine Greer's The Female Eunuch in Britain offered similarly incisive reinterpretations of canonical works like Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. Greer highlighted underlying themes of female abduction, coercion, and forced submission within narratives traditionally perceived as innocent or romantic. This evolving field, later termed gynocriticism by Elaine Showalter, championed women's unique interpretive access to texts written by female authors. Showalter's influential A Literature of Their Own advocated for the recovery and reevaluation of women's writing, mapping its progression through feminine, feminist, and female phases of critical engagement. Further deepening this reevaluation, Sandra Gilbert and Susan Gubar's The Madwoman in the Attic famously reinterpreted figures such as Bertha Mason from Jane Eyre. No longer merely a Gothic monster, Bertha emerged as a profound symbol of the historically oppressed woman, her perceived madness recast as the outward manifestation of an inner rage against patriarchal confines. This critical transformation empowered women to ascend to leading academic and publishing roles, profoundly altering the literary landscape by demanding new readings and fostering a more nuanced understanding of literature's role in reflecting and shaping societal power dynamics.
Chapter 41. Plagiarism. Plagiarism, literally meaning literary kidnapping, stands as literature's capital offense, though it's unique in that the original work remains undiminished. While legally a civil transgression prompting damages rather than imprisonment, its stringent prohibition coexists uneasily with the fundamental liberties of creative expression. A crucial tenet asserts no copyright in ideas, enabling authors to develop popular themes or genres, a practice exemplified by the enduring vampire narrative. Copyright primarily safeguards the precise form of expression, the actual words used, rather than abstract concepts or even titles. Historically, literary borrowing was more fluid, with figures like Shakespeare freely adapting existing material. Modern disputes, such as those involving Alex Haley's Roots and Ian McEwan's Atonement, underscore these complexities. One resulted in a settlement for uncredited borrowing, while the other defended value-added transformation. Courts, as in the Da Vinci Code case, have consistently affirmed protection for specific expression over broad themes. However, the digital age presents a new frontier, with the internet fueling widespread unacknowledged borrowing, particularly in education, signaling a potential shift in societal attitudes toward literary property.
42. Obscenity, when applied to literature, functions as a non-literary judgment,
often leading to criminal accusations against works deemed morally objectionable due to their sexual content. Distinct from pornography, this label has frequently been affixed to groundbreaking or experimental writing, though authors often wear it as a badge of honor, acknowledging the countless literary figures who have faced imprisonment for challenging societal norms. This concept proves to be a perpetually moving target, its definition highly fluid. What one individual or community deems obscene, another might consider erotica. Its interpretation shifts dramatically across different eras and geographical locations, meaning a work banned in one locality might be celebrated as a book of the day elsewhere. Seminal works such as James Joyce's Ulysses, D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover, and Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita vividly illustrate this phenomenon. Initially banned in their home countries for obscenity, these texts, unaltered, have since become securely canonical, taught widely in higher literature courses. Their journey from controversial to classic reflects a fundamental change not in the books themselves, but in the world's sexual mores and perceptions of permissibility. The enduring saga of John Cleland's Fanny Hill, or Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure, further highlights the inherent absurdities of obscenity laws. Written in the mid-18th century, this novel was repeatedly prosecuted for obscenity, yet it persisted, selling briskly underground and eventually resurfacing as a respected Oxford World's Classic and a popular television adaptation. Though technically still banned in some contexts, its continued relevance underscores how legal frameworks often lag behind cultural evolution. A critical turning point occurred with the 1960 trial of D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover. This case effectively crippled the old deprave and corrupt tests for obscenity, replacing them with a more nuanced consideration of a work's redeeming merit, whether social or literary. The prosecution's famously outmoded appeal to the jury's concerns about their young sons, young daughters, wife or servants underscored a profound disconnect with the changing cultural landscape of the era. Defending counsel eloquently argued for unfettered artistic freedom, emphasizing that there cannot be a limit on the writer. By the close of the decade, obscenity, as a significant legal barrier to literature, was largely defunct in metropolitan areas of the English-speaking world, though sporadic bannings persist in some local communities, particularly in the U.S. Paradoxically, some writers even regretted the demise of obscenity laws, believing that the need to circumvent censorship had historically sharpened writers' wit and ingenuity. Chapter 43. Libel. Literature, by its very nature, grapples with the depiction of real living people, RLPs. While fictional and deceased characters pose no legal obstacles, portraying those who still live is fraught with peril. Libel, defined as written defamation, distinguishes itself from slander, which is oral. This distinction is critical for writers, as published words carry a higher legal risk. Historically, offended parties might resort to physical retaliation, as John Dryden experienced. Today, dulcet-voiced thugs in gowns and wigs handle the pummeling through legal action. A common strategy to navigate this minefield is the Roman a clef, or novel with a key, where real individuals are thinly disguised through altered names and details. However, this cloak of invisibility is not always foolproof. Readers, and crucially, the subjects themselves, can often make the intended identification, leading to severe consequences for authors and publishers, such as the pulping of entire editions, as seen with Jake Arnott's Johnny Come Home. The law aligns with Shakespeare's sentiment: a good name is paramount, and ignorance is no defense for injuring a real reputation. Exceptions exist for lampooning figures who, like Idi Amin, have no good name to lose, or for comedians whose license extends to the page. Authors can also safely depict themselves in propria persona, offering satirical self-portraits. Ultimately, libel remains a dangerous but intriguing challenge, requiring writers to tread carefully through its literary minefield. Chapter 44. Blasphemy. The historical crime of blasphemous libel, abolished in mainland Britain in 2008, once provided authorities with a potent weapon, primarily targeting religious dissenters, freethinkers, and later minorities. Its application was often horrifyingly severe. In 1656, the Quaker James Naylor endured brutal corporal punishment, including flogging, tongue-piercing, and branding, for an act perceived as a blasphemous impersonation of Christ. Even in the 19th century, publishing works like Shelley's Queen Mab could lead to convictions, demonstrating the law's enduring reach over literary expression. A notable resurgence occurred in 1977 when Gay News faced a successful private prosecution for a controversial poem and illustration, revealing the law's capacity for sectarian misuse against marginalized groups. The global controversy surrounding Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses in 1989 further underscored the profound international implications of blasphemy accusations, even without a successful UK prosecution. Although mainland Britain has moved past this legislation, its persistence in Northern Ireland and its reintroduction in Southern Ireland, coupled with rising multi-faith tensions globally, signifies that the red-hot poker of blasphemy continues to glow, ensuring its prominent role in future cultural and legal debates. 45. Permissiveness. The mid-20th century saw significant cultural shifts, with legislative changes in the UK and US dismantling previous obscenity laws and censorship. This era, celebrated as a move towards a civilized society, initially appeared a clear victory for literary and cultural emancipation. However, this permissiveness soon faced a countercurrent. By the late 1970s, new controls emerged, framed as political correctness or sensitivity. Feminist critiques, notably from Andrea Dworkin, challenged new pornography and advocated for fresh censorship. This corrective force influenced publishing, as seen with the controversy surrounding Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho, and impacted academic curricula. Posthumous revelations of Philip Larkin's racist remarks led to his poetry's re-evaluation, while works by Joseph Conrad and Mark Twain faced scrutiny over racial language. This era marked a tension between artistic freedom, championed by writers like Philip Roth, who argued for exploring the human stain, and the pressures of new cultural orthodoxies, which some likened to linguistic fascism. 46. Literary lies. Literature, despite its fictional nature, isn't always immune to allegations of untruth. While poets traditionally argue they affirm nothing and therefore cannot lie, there are instances where authors are culpably caught making stretchers, exaggerations, or falsehoods that illuminate how literary practice sometimes operates. These literary deceptions exist on a spectrum, from minor embellishments to profoundly damaging fabrications. On the lighter end, authors might gild the lily by enhancing stories about their creative process, like Wilkie Collins fabricating the dramatic discovery of The Woman in White's title. Closely related are heroic lies, where authors exaggerate their own experiences to appear more resilient or impressive, as James Frey did in A Million Little Pieces regarding his addiction recovery. Further along the spectrum lies suppressio veri, the deliberate omission of uncomfortable truths. Jack London, for instance, in his memoir John Barleycorn, chose not to reveal the painful stigma of his true parentage. Authors may also engage in compositional lies, creating compelling but false backstories about their work, such as Anthony Burgess claiming to have written A Clockwork Orange under a death sentence from cancer. More serious is outright forgery, where individuals fabricate entire works or identities. Historically, figures like Thomas Chatterton and James McPherson created pseudo-medieval or Gallic epics. More recently, Jerzy Kosinski faced accusations of plagiarism and ghostwriting, and J.T. Leroy was exposed as a fabricated persona. These acts often stem from a desire to outsmart the reading public, as seen in William Sharp's creation of the best-selling novelist Fiona MacLeod. At the darkest end are Lies That Really Hurt and The Very Worst Literary Lying. Imamu Amiri Baraka's poem containing anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about 9/11 exemplifies how literature can spread harmful misinformation. Most reprehensible are fabricated Holocaust memoirs, such as Herman Rosenblatt's Angel at the Fence, which, when exposed as false, undermine the credibility of genuine survivor testimonies and cause immense pain, representing a wholly black literary lie. Chapter 47. Ghostwriters. Ghostwriting, a curious literary phenomenon, is often deemed a mere misdemeanor rather than the capital crime of plagiarism, presenting a subtle paradox in authorship. Its spectral presence has long marked literature, from anonymous ancient works like Beowulf to compassionate helping hands who completed the unfinished novels of ailing masters. The practice later professionalized in the 1920s, spurred by figures like Christy Walsh for sports celebrity memoirs, and further evolved through creative editors such as Maxwell Perkins, whose profound shaping of seminal works sometimes rendered him an unseen co-creator. In contemporary times, ghostwriting largely serves two commercial imperatives: exploiting the brand to sustain the output of highly popular or deceased authors, and producing celebrity books for public figures often too busy or unequipped to pen their own narratives. Ultimately, the invisible hand behind the published text frequently goes unnoticed by readers who, much like those enjoying pre-baked cakes, often prioritize the narrative and brand over the singular, visible authorial presence. 48. Fanfic. Fanfic, or fanfic, represents a dynamic new literary form emerging from the Internet's unregulated environment. It comprises writing by dedicated fans who seek to extend or reinterpret their cherished works. Often described as textual poaching, this practice thrives beyond traditional copyright constraints, yet adheres to its own intricate rules concerning alternative universes and respect for original canon. While some authors, like Lois McMaster Bujold, welcome fanfic, others, such as Anne Rice, vehemently oppose it, citing copyright concerns. J.K. Rowling, whose work inspires a vast fan domain, takes a more tolerant stance, albeit with limitations. This genre is inherently democratic, often anonymous, and operates distinctively from conventional narrative forms. Unlike commercially commissioned, printed, or distributed fiction, fanfic is coterie-generated and circulated. It exists as a shared, non-commercial activity, akin to ongoing literary conversation rather than a commodity. Its roots trace back to early science fiction fanzines of the 1930s, and later explosively with the advent of computer chat rooms and websites in the 1980s. A notable variant, slashfic, explores unconventional, often homosexual, relationships between established characters, originating with Star Trek fandom. Fundamentally, fanfic embodies a freedom of expression, allowing creators to publish on the web what they can't print on the page, representing a potential reader-driven future for fiction. 49. The e-book. In the 1960s, Marshall McLuhan theorized humanity was transitioning from print culture into an electronic age. His profound assertion, "The medium is the message," contended that electronic media weren't passive carriers but active shapers, effectively new senses that would make future readers bionic. He famously predicted a global village of intimate, planetary communication decades before the Internet. While impactful, his focus on the medium sometimes overshadowed content and ideology. McLuhan's distinction between hot and cool media remains relevant. Hot media, like printed words, are data-rich, requiring low audience participation. Cool media, such as television or comics, demand active engagement to fill in the gaps. Modern interactive technologies increasingly embody these cool attributes. The ebook, unforeseen by McLuhan, exemplifies his rear mirrorism, viewing new innovations through an old lens. Far beyond a mere digital book, it serves as an extensive archive, a text transmission device, and a versatile formatting tool. While its potential is vast, some experts express concern about its neurological impact, fearing web-based systems might cultivate shorter attention spans and hinder deep narrative comprehension. Yet, the ebook's future promises rich multimedia, interactive annotations, and community-driven content poised for a revolution in how we consume and engage with text, mirroring the automotive's transformative influence on travel.
50. Literary inundation. The digital age has ushered in an unprecedented literary inundation, akin to powerful telescopes overwhelming astronomers with data. This deluge fundamentally alters what it means to be well-read, as online archives make millions of books instantly accessible, and new publications far outstrip humanity's capacity to consume them. This creates a paradox where collective ignorance grows faster than individual knowledge. Historically, responses to information overload included retreating into familiar genres, offering a limited goldfish bowl experience compared to the ocean of available works. Another approach involved relying on authoritative critics to discriminate and curate must-read lists, a method increasingly out of fashion due to its dictatorial nature. A contemporary strategy, the long-tail approach, champions using sophisticated electronic cataloging to forge individual, unique paths through the vast literary landscape. This offers a rich smorgasbord for personalized discovery, but demands considerable skill to navigate unstandardized sources. Ultimately, this era provokes profound questions about literature's future and its traditional forms, yet the timeless challenge remains. While acquiring books is easier than ever, finding the time to truly engage with them is the enduring dilemma.
That wraps up our exploration of today's book. If even one idea here gave you something to reflect on, give it a like so YouTube knows to share more with you. And if you'd like the next insight in your feed, hit subscribe. Remember, what you heard today is our independent interpretation, enriched with analysis and exercises. The full book has far more depth, so consider reading it to experience the author's work directly. Thanks for listening to Deaf Do Insights, where we turn great books into tools for growth.